College campuses around the country have problems with individuality among students, with UB included. The lack of expression is extremely noticeable on campus. At UB, the wintertime seems to bring a blanket of dullness along with all of the snow. Students are forced to stay inside without being able to express their ideas freely in a matter they choose. We're basically in a cage. In one of the TED Talks lectures, Stephen Johnson discusses how people gather ideas in his speech, Where Good Ideas Come From. He mentions how people are social beings with imaginations that are meant to be shared with one another. He states that good ideas originate from a string of thoughts until an individual is able to make the connections to form a viable idea. A major setting that was discussed in our sources was a coffee shop. The first coffee shop created was in Damascus in the year 1530. Even 500 years ago, people would gather here and share their minds to one another. A small cafe is an ideal place for the transfer of knowledge due to the proximity and the beverages that help stimulate the mind. At schools across the country, including UB, students are forced to endure these massive lecture halls that have hundreds of students. This is a massive detriment to the mind of the modern-day college student. These huge lectures makes it almost impossible for students to express themselves. The amount of imaginative stimulation the student receives during one of these lectures is slim to none. This setting causes all of these students' individuality to be suppressed by the huge mass of students, along with the teacher not being able to provide nearly enough attention to each student. The only means of student-to-teacher communication in the average lecture hall is if a student raises their hand to ask a question or make a comment. Even then, it is a chore for some to speak in front of the entire class. This lack of expression causes overall morale to fall, which directly translates to lower grades. In these enormous lecture halls, the relationship between the professor and the student is nearly non-existent. At this level, grades are so much more stressed than at all other levels. This high demand to get good grades mixed with the harder course material creates an all-around negative impact on the students. It causes a student's attitude to become introverted, which in part leads to less of a desire to make connections with fellow students and the teacher. In high school, the environment is completely different than college. For example, this semester I took a Chem 102 class that was supposed to have 150 students. As the weeks moved on, the number of kids that showed up to class dwindled to the point where I counted 18 students present during a lecture. Not only was the professor subpar, but the lack of students made that classroom as dry as a desert when it comes to creativity. The simple fix to the problem would be just to terminate the large lecture hall style that exists and reform back to the old-fashioned model, where the teacher-to-student ratio is around 1 to 30. In this setup, students are much less intimidated by their environment, which leads to an individual being more social, higher participation, and an overall healthier place for development. I've made some of my best friends solely because we had class together in high school. However, this proposal is rather unrealistic. The process would be extremely expensive, and there just aren't enough classrooms or staff to be able to maintain a successful standard as a university. This raises the question, what plausible way can students, teachers, and the community think of that will help increase creativity and expression in the classroom? I asked my psychology professor this exact question during one of his office hours. He replied stating that much of the blame falls upon the educators. It is their job to put students in a position to thrive academically and mentally. He explained that the students crave interaction and challenge, but only to a certain point. What the education system has turned into is a competition to see who could do better than the other when it should be about self-achievement. This professor tried integrating the use of media to his lecture. He used a smartphone application called Top Hat to keep his students engaged and interested. This app gives students multiple choice questions to answer during his lecture that are graded and count towards their final average. Not only did he incorporate questions based on his course material, but he would also use to survey the class's personal opinions on various topics and find out about personal experiences. A theory that I believe would be very effective is if teachers randomly assigned all of the students study groups. This would create an opportunity for students to express themselves freely in the classroom and potentially make friendships rather than being completely absorbed into redundant lecture slides. It would create the ideal environment for students to thrive. Once installed, this system could have various different methods of processing. Study groups could be changed up every week or two. This would create a melting pot of creativity within the lecture hall. The professor may even wish to assign group work outside of the lecture to really motivate the students to share thoughts with others. This model would help raise spirits inside and outside the classroom. In the article, The Creativity Crisis by Poe Bronson and Ashley Merriman, they call attention to the steady decline of creativity across the U.S. by monitoring the levels of creativity in children and adults. Evidence yields the conclusion that over the past 50 years, creativity in the U.S. has been declining. They explain how creativity is something that can be exercised and improved with artistic expression and problem solving. This falling creativity could be a result of the education system becoming entirely scripted by society. An individual is forced to choose a pathway for themselves at a point in their lives when their minds are still developing. To ask students what they wish to do with their lives at such a young age is unjust and unfair. How is someone expected to reach their potential if they aren't able to explore all fields and find out what they really want to do? I also asked a fellow peer about his thoughts on the group study model earlier proposed. He believed that with some test trials in class, it had potential to change the way students look at their entire college experience. Just the thought of changing the style of the large lecture hall model caused him to spark up multiple ideas of how to change the system and what we can do to make a difference. Something that I have found to be extremely helpful are office hours and one-on-one meetings with teachers, assistants, and professors. By physically getting to meet the person who is teaching you the material, you get a better understanding of what it takes to succeed in the class. Knowing that there is a person who wants you to achieve instead of just viewing it as another boring lecture certainly raises confidence in the student. As a community, it is the students' and the teacher's responsibility to reform the current system. By working together, it is definitely possible to introduce a new model of teaching and learning that forms a system that suits both parties equally. People don't realize that the classroom is like a machine. It requires motivated students along with a willing teacher to make the machine run to its best ability. Creativity is vital to development at any stage in a person's life. The current format creates many underlying problems in a young adult of today. The lack of expression and imagination causes the whole university to suffer because students aren't able to express themselves in an environment that seems comfortable and tolerant of their ideas. By grouping up into small factions, student development would be in a setting that is ideal for individuality.